All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. We really appreciate you coming to learn more about Wordly and how we use Wordly for simultaneous translation in Zoom. So what I'm going to do is present to you some of the nuts and bolts of how it works from both an attendee and from a host point of view. Before I jump in, I just would like to introduce myself. I'm Kirk Hendrickson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Wordly. Also on the call, and you'll be hearing from him at some points, is Lakshman Rathnam. He is our Chief Executive Officer and founder of Wordly. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Oops. So first, I just a little quick agenda here. First, we're going to talk very briefly about Wordly. I know that many of you know us very well. Some of you are relatively new to who we are. So we're going to give a very brief introduction. Then we're going to focus on what the attendee experience is like for a user of Zoom who is attending a Zoom webinar, who is then going to be using Wordly. And within that, we're going to focus on two different aspects. One is closed caption, and then the other is multi-language translation. Then we're going to shift gears, and instead of talking about the attendees' experience, we're going to focus on your experience as a host, event manager, whatever term you prefer, who is handling and managing the webinar itself. And then we'll go through what's required to set up the webinars within Zoom, to use Wordly, how do you start a live stream of Wordly, and then how do you do things like manage closed captioning. And then finally, we're going to end with a series of questions. Hopefully, feel free to add them in the chat as we go. Right now, Lakshman is monitoring the chat, and he'll be answering your questions if you have them in real time. So please feel free to actively engage us that way. So a little bit briefly about Wordly. First, about Wordly, the product. So it is AI powered and highly scalable. It provides real-time multilingual translation, and it is focused on increasing productivity and inclusivity. Wordly, the company, launched the Wordly Language on Demand product in Q2 of 2019. Currently, we have over 70 customers who are using it for webinars, meetings, conferences, virtual conferences, and many more applications where translation in real time is needed, and giving them the opportunities to, as we say, increase productivity and increase inclusivity. So on to Zoom and Wordly. So what we're going to do first is focus on the experience of a Zoom webinar attendee and what their experience will be like when they start using Wordly. The first thing that we're going to do is talk about showing closed captions from Wordly in Zoom. So this is the case where we're capturing the audio using Wordly from a Zoom meeting, and then we're going to be showing it as closed captions within the Zoom screen itself. So this is basics of how it works. You can see that, what you'll see is a presentation, the typical Zoom presentation like we're doing right now. And then what you'll see at the bottom of the screen are 3 lines showing text that's coming through in real time for the transcription or translation of what's being said. So either the captions or the subtitles, but it will be placed directly over the Zoom screen. Now, here are the steps that we're going to need to do to, sort of follow along in order to be able to accomplish this as an attendee. So at this point, what's happening is that we are starting. You'll notice that there is a little closed caption option. It might look like this. It may be under your more options. So it's something where you want to be able to select those closed captions. Then you will be able to, click on that little up arrow next to closed captions. After you click on that up arrow, you'll be given an option to show subtitles or view full transcript, view subtitle settings. When closed captions are on, you're going to see an option that says closed caption is available. So the attendee is going to see that. So for example, I just saw a message, and you probably all saw the message that said closed caption was on. So now you click on the show subtitle, and you'll now be able to see the subtitles of the Wordly session or of this meeting being shown in Zoom. So now Wordly is the one that's handling processing those subtitles and delivering them directly into the Zoom system. Now, as we start to see this, hopefully everybody has followed along and you are able to turn on your subtitles and are seeing them coming through in English right now. Some important considerations as we use the closed captions. Number one is that the attendee is going to need to choose to show closed captions themselves. It doesn't just automatically appear on their screens. They'll see a message in Zoom, and then from that message, they will select and the ability to show subtitles, and then they'll see the subtitles coming through. Next consideration is that Zoom only allows us to show a single language to all audience members at any one time. So this means that an individual attendee does not get to select what language they're seeing their subtitles in. Everybody will see subtitles based on the language you as the host chooses. So we're going to later talk about that and show you how that works. How do you choose a language? How do you make it so that you can change to a different language for these subtitles? For now, we're going to maintain subtitles in English. A third consideration is that occasionally you're going to run into limits that have to do with Zoom. First thing is that you're going to see that there's a 126 character limit approximately and 3 lines of text. This is depending a bit on the language specifically selected. But that does mean that there's a limited number of characters, a limited number of words that you're able to see on the screen at any one time. So those are just some limitations that you want to keep in mind and consider when using captioning. So now you see from an attendee experience the basic idea of captioning and what we can do with Zoom and Wordly. With that, we're going to move on to translation. So in order to receive translation, so where an individual can choose their specific language, what you're going to do is look for a little section called On Custom Live Streaming Service. This is what allows you to access Wordly for translation. So if you will notice, you should all see something like this where it says live on custom live streaming service. It's usually in the upper left corner of your screen. So please feel free to click on that. And you can see click on the down arrow there. When you click on the down arrow, you should see a pop-up that looks something like this, where you have an option to view stream on custom live streaming service or copy streaming link. Now, if you're on a mobile device, you will only see the option to copy streaming link. So in this case, assuming that you are on, say, laptop or desktop, please go ahead and click on View Stream on Custom Live Streaming Service. What this will do is this will now open up a Wordly session. So the Wordly session is opened up in a separate web browser. And so you may need to go and switch to that web browser. But what you're going to see is a standard Wordly session. So with that Wordly session, it's going to look something like this. And you'll be jumped right in to the conversation. In this case, you'll be jumped right into English. If you would like to change your language, what you do is you simply click on the language, and then you'll be able to see a drop-down menu to allow you to select the language, your preferred language of your choice. So once again, this is the experience that an attendee to the webinar will have. They can either be using and seeing the closed captions, or if they would like some different language than the closed captions, they simply click on the live, click on the view option, and then they will have full access to the Wordly system, where they will be able to both see and hear the translation coming through in real time. Now, we do suggest that you have everyone resize their browser window, the one that is showing Wordly, to fit next to the Zoom webinar window. That way they can follow along with the Wordly browser, with the Wordly translation, as they are also watching the video. It's good to mention to people that they can resize the browser window, as sometimes it's something that people forget that they can do. and they instead try switching back and forth between the two screens. It's just simply much easier to resize your window and have it next to the Zoom webinar window. So that was the experience from the attendee point of view. It's allowing them to both see the closed captions as well as to be able to see the translations in the language of their choice. Now we're going to switch to the host experience. How do you set this up? How do you get this running? Now, many of you who have quite a bit of experience with us will see how simple the process is here. But for those of you who are new, this will be hopefully a good experience to see how quickly you're going to be able to set up your webinars using Wordly. The first thing to note, though, is that because this is for webinars, there is one setup requirement that unfortunately does require your admin. So if you do have, before you do this, you're likely going to either have to have admin access yourself or be able to work with your Zoom admin in order to do this one piece of setup. Now, the good news is once this one piece is done, you aren't going to have to redo it. You'll just have to get it done once and in collaboration with your Zoom admin. So the first step is that they're going to go to under admin, they're going to go to account management webinar settings. So here it is, what it looks like within Zoom. Then within the webinar settings, you're going to scroll down to the section called In Webinar Settings. So you'll see that in webinar settings, it talks about allowing hosts to live stream their webinars. So that's effectively what you're going to be doing, is you're going to be live streaming the Wordly webinars in order for you to be able to receive the audio from the Zoom system into Wordly. So the next step that we want to do for the admin is to click on Edit. And this is where we're going to customize for the Wordly live stream. So once they've done Edit, it's going to bring them into options like this. And what you want to do is you want to click on Allow hosts to live stream their webinar. You want to click off any of the other live streams. There's usually a variety of live streams that are available. Unfortunately, Zoom only allows you to live stream one item at a time. So if you want to live stream Wordly, you need to make sure that the other live streams are turned off. Then what you want to do is click on the custom live streaming service. Next step is that there's some template information that needs to be entered. Now, the reality is that not much has to be entered here, but it's our experience that it is much easier to enter relatively complete instructions here to make it easier for whoever is scheduling the webinar to follow through with these instructions and largely just copy and paste so that it's very easy to set up the webinar. So you can see here's the basic instruction template that we use and that we suggest for the webinars. Finally, you want to then save the changes to make sure that they take effect and that you now have the custom live streaming service enabled from the admin point of view. Now at this point, you as the host are going to want to schedule your webinar and schedule your Wordly session to go with that webinar. So first, what we suggest is you go to the Wordly portal. So the Wordly portal is reachable at portal.wordly.ai, where you are able to log in using your same login credentials that you have used if you've logged into the phone or if you've logged into the previous portal. From there, you are able to schedule a Wordly session. And then what you want to do once you schedule the Wordly session, and I'm going to go into a little more detail in this later, is record the session ID and key. Then you want to return to your Zoom webinar. And in your Zoom webinar, what you want to do is you want to schedule a webinar as you normally would. And then after you've scheduled the webinar, you're going to go in and edit it to edit the live stream. So we're returning to the portal itself. Once again, it's at portal.wordly.ai. And what you're going to see when you log in at portal.wordly.ai is quite a bit of information related to your account. You're going to see things like total time that's available. You're going to see recent usage. You're going to see your relatively recent session activity, like what was your last session, and then you're going to see a variety of other items, including schedules and integrations. And so there's a variety of different information that you'll see at the portal. If you haven't been to the portal before, I encourage you to log in and take a look. In addition, the next thing that you would do is you will click on the monitor, which is our sessions section. And within the session section, you'll see a button that says add session. So you'll go ahead and click on the add session button, and then it's going to pop up um, an entry form like this. So in this entry form, this is where you're going to go and enter the information that you need in order to create the session that you want. Once you have created the session, then you're going to end up generating a new session, and that session is going to have, as we can see here, a session ID and a key. So those are the two pieces of information that you're going to need for your Zoom webinar in order to connect the Zoom webinar to the Wordly meeting. So now with those pieces of information and a Zoom webinar scheduled, we're going to go back into Zoom, and we're going to, in the webinar itself that you're now editing, you're going to scroll to live streaming. And so you'll see where it says it's towards the bottom of the screen on your webinar, live streaming. And you're going to click on that live streaming button. And then you're going to see options here where you get to, it shows live, and then add service. So you're going to then click on add service. And then the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to see the live streaming service. So now, as we see the add live stream service, you can see that there is that template of instructions that I mentioned earlier. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that information from the template of instructions, and you're also going to take the Wordly meeting ID as well as the Wordly key, and you're also going to take your Zoom meeting ID or webinar ID, and you're going to use that information to populate the stream URL field, the stream key field, and the live streaming page URL field. And so, as you can see, we're populating those fields and with the appropriate information. And then once you're done with that, you click save. And at that point, you're ready to go. So you are all set up. So it's literally once you have a webinar scheduled, you enter those three pieces of information, and you are all ready for being able to stream that Zoom session into Wordly. So now let's talk about how do you actually do the streaming? What are the steps that you take to start a live stream once you have started your webinar? The first thing obviously you do is you need to start your Zoom webinar. Once you've started your Zoom webinar, you'll see that there's a section that generally says more. So you'll see the three dots in more. And when you click on that, you're given an option that says live on custom live streaming service. So once you click on live on custom live streaming service, then the next thing that happens is that you pop up and you will now see this option where it says live on custom live streaming service. So at this point, Wordly is live. It is running in the background. You don't have to do anything else because your stream has been initiated once you see that live. Now, this will also be shown to all of the participants, the attendees in the meeting. They'll all be able to see the live and custom live streaming service option as we showed you earlier in the attendee section. And this is the steps that you take to start it. So very straightforward. You do have to remember to do it. Doesn't unfortunately happen automatically, but taking those 2 clicks, you're now able to initiate your live streaming session. And so all the audio that's coming through that Zoom session is now also being piped through the Wordly system and therefore able to be transcribed and translated. So now that we have the system live, you may wish to be able to manage your captions. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of how do you set up and start captions, and how do you manage those captions. So as you can see, we do have captions live at this point. And so we're going to I turned them off because they were interfering a bit with some of the things I was showing, but I'll show the subtitles again. So we do have our captions live. And what we're going to do is in order to start and manage captions, one of the things that we have to do is copy what's known as the API token. So there is, as the host, what you will have access to is a button that says closed captions, and you'll click on the closed caption button, and then it's going to pop up this little menu of options. Within this menu of options, you want to click on the copy the API token. So the API token is what tells Zoom that you can connect, how to connect to that specific Zoom meeting to provide closed captions for that meeting. And so this is what the API token is used for. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take that API token and we're going to plug it in to Wordly. So you go to your Wordly session. So when you kicked off the live stream, you also launched a Wordly session. It was probably in the background. So you will need to go locate this particular session for yourself as the host. And then within that, you're going to see a little drop down under the gear that shows you Zoom. So you go ahead and click on Zoom. And then what it's going to do is it's going to pop up a window where you are allowed to enter the Zoom API token. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and click copy the API key here. And then once the API key is here, you simply hit start captions. And now all attendees will see the message that they will now be able to see captions. And so captions are available. And so they're going to see that captions are available, and they're going to be able to then do what we did in the attendee process and show your subtitles. Now, one of the things to note is that it does generally take about 10 seconds before these closed captions start responding. So we do encourage you to go in and set these up before you are going to need them. So make sure to launch closed captions a little bit before the session begins if you wish to have them, because there is a little bit of startup time associated with the closed captions. Now, in many cases, you're going to want your closed captions to not just be, say, in English as they're being shown now. Instead, you're going to want your closed captions to be in different languages. And so how you change that is that you once again are going to go to the Wordly screen. So there's that Wordly screen that's associated with your session, the one you just entered the API token in. And then in this, you're going to click on the gear and you're going to select language. Then you're going to change the language. In this case, let's go ahead and change the language to, say, for instance, Spanish. And so we're going to select Spanish. And then once we have selected Spanish, we're going to now see that the subtitles are now all coming through in Spanish. So hopefully everybody can see that within my screen, that we are now seeing the subtitles in Spanish. Hopefully you can see it on your screen, that the subtitles for this session are coming through in Spanish. So if you wish to change to different language, just simply same process, select and change that language. Do note again, the one consideration is that when you change to a specific language, all captions are being shown in that specific language to everyone. So people, effectively at that point, they get to choose to either see captions or not. They don't get to change language. You as the host are the only one that can control the language that's shown in the subtitles. Now, so the nice thing that is that when we all want to wrap everything up, the easiest thing to do is you simply end the Wordly session. And once you end that by just simply ending the Zoom webinar. So because the session is tied to the Zoom webinar, when you end the Zoom webinar, it will also end the Wordly session. So you don't have to do anything unusual or different in order to allow you to end the session. So with that, that's been a very quick overview of how you use Zoom and Wordly together. And what I'd love to do now is see if Lakshman has any questions. Lakshman, you want to jump in and maybe we'll go through the Q&A and we'll answer those questions together.
Yeah, so thank you all for attending the webinar. The most popular question is, can this function be used in Zoom meetings or only in the webinar feature? I can answer that. So today, you're able to do it on webinars, but this should be available on Zoom meetings as well in a week or two.
Okay. So what other, let's see, we have other questions. Watchman,
Yeah.
what other questions do we have? We should...
So the other question is, can a multilingual speaker use, let's say, English and Spanish when they're speaking? Might that confuse the system?
Okay. Do you want to answer that, or would you like me to?
Why don't you answer that?
Okay. So today, the system is set up so that it is, for a webinar, it is expecting a single language input. You do not have the ability to rapidly change that language during the session, but you can set it up so that the expectation is that the speakers are speaking in Spanish or the speakers are speaking in English within the way Zoom webinar is set up today. This is something that we are looking at for our roadmap to allow the ability to change languages. So we're hopefully will be adding that feature in the not too distant future.
Yeah, another interesting question, Kirk, is what about following along in another language on your mobile device?
You can use the Wordly system integrated here on your mobile device. So one of the things that we had mentioned when you click on View Live Streaming Service on a mobile phone, it says effectively copy streaming link, and what you do is you copy the streaming link, then you go to your browser, you open that streaming link in your browser on your mobile device. And so now you're having the full Wordly experience on your mobile device. You absolutely can use the audio off of your mobile device to listen to the Wordly session. So you're following along in the language of your choice from your mobile device. You don't necessarily have to have it all being used just from your laptop. We do have some clients that strongly suggest that you use your mobile device in addition to your laptop. You follow along, say, the Zoom meeting, Zoom webinar itself on the laptop, and then you're using Wordly on your mobile device to both see and hear in the language of your choice.
Yeah, and then just to follow up on that, can all audio be translated? Does that mean including recorded video broadcasting on Zoom webinar?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anything that is, any audio that comes across the Zoom webinar is translated. So Wordly is happy to take that, whether that's a recorded video, a pre-recorded video, whether that's one or two people speaking live or a whole panel of people speaking live. The main thing to note when it comes to pre-recorded video is that there just needs to not be a lot of background noise. So you don't want to have quite a bit of music in the background or heavy noise in the background because we are attempting to translate the audio stream. And so the audio stream just needs to have a certain amount of clarity in order to be able to correctly translate it. But as long as it's the pre-recorded audio stream without a lot of background noise or music, loud music in the background, it will come across just fine, and it will have no difference than if people were speaking live in the Zoom webinar.
One interesting question, Kirk, is how could you have the same session translated to different groups in different languages? Can I take this?
Absolutely.
So the beauty about this is that you don't need to do it differently for different people. They could, if you just are broadcasting it live, people can follow along in their language, in different languages at the same time. I think that was the answer to the question. Like, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so the choice is that with the closed caption, you have that single language constraint that is unfortunately introduced through Zoom. If you want to have multiple languages, then you would have them go to the Wordly window. That's the adjunct window, and then they could follow along in whatever language of their choice through the Wordly window. So any further questions, Lakshman, or we've run out of questions?
Yeah, let me just see if there's any more questions. So one other question was, can you live stream to YouTube at the same time as using Wordly? And so this seems to be a limitation from Zoom, that you can only live stream to one of the options. And if this is something that you actually, or our customers desire, we can work with Zoom and see what they can allow us to do.
It looks like there's a question about pricing. So one of the things to note is that there's simply no additional charge from our end related to being able to use the Zoom integration service. So it's using standard Wordly pricing. So if you have a Wordly package, which allows you to use the Wordly hours, then the Zoom integration is just available as part of that. There are no additional charges. On the Zoom side, obviously, if this is working with Zoom Webinar, you're going to need to have a Zoom Webinar license. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of comments. Mike, I appreciate the comments. So we'll definitely look into those and look forward to your the follow-up. Rosemary, we can discuss additional, talk more about costs later, but as I mentioned, there's no additional cost for adding the Zoom webinar feature. If there are no more additional questions, thank you all so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you happen to be, and learning more about Zoom and Wordly. We'll be happy to take questions via email, and I will be sending out this presentation, a link to this presentation to everyone who has attended. And so thank you very much. Lakshman, would you like to say any final words?
Yeah, there's one last question that came up, Kirk, is the host cannot adjust the language to a specific group that would have registered for a specific translated language. So Marie, maybe we can discuss, I can answer this a little bit more in detail in person, but let me try and address this for you and for everybody, right? So there are two, as Kirk showed, there are two features that are allowed on Zoom. One is to do the closed captions, and one is to do the translation into multiple languages. So the closed captions are only are allowed in only one language, whereas the translation on a separate window under the live stream is capable to do, we are able to do that in multiple languages. So we support 16 languages today, and you're able to pick on, use that, any of those 16 languages where people can read and hear in the language of choice. One last question came up, is that can you add customized vocabulary that the AI can learn? And Kirk, you can take that.
Yes, thank you. So absolutely. So Wordly does support a glossary of terminology, which allows you to input specific terms that are relevant to your organization or industry, and that allow you to effectively customize the language that's used within the Wordly system. What it does is we strongly encourage you, in fact, to use the glossary specifically on things such as brand names, acronyms and abbreviations that are used within your organization, as those aren't words, and so how they're used can vary quite a bit. And so we want to, you definitely want to include those. Critical individuals' names, because individuals' names have such a wide variety of ways that they're both spelled and pronounced, that we strongly encourage you to include those in the glossary, as well as critical technical terminology. So all those would be included in the glossary. The glossary is specific to your Wordly account, and so you upload those terms into the glossary, and then they will influence how Wordly selects the appropriate word that you're going to be using and then be translated.
Yeah, one last question, Kirk. Some people may not be able to select the language when they try to hear the translation. It says the language is not supported for spoken output. So one way to enable this is that you can go to your computer. On your computer, under accessibility, you need to choose the languages that you want to hear in. And this is something that you can turn on either in the Mac or Windows. You can go and add those languages. And once those languages are added onto your machine, then you'll be able to hear in that language. And most people, when they have in their native language, their systems, their languages, their preferred languages are usually turned on. So this is 90 to 95% of the time. It's not an issue, but when it is an issue, we just ask people to go onto their devices and add the languages that they want to hear in. Okay. That was a great
Fantastic.
session.
Yes. Well, thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate it. And as I said, we will be following up by email with a copy of the presentation. And please, if you do have any additional questions, feel free to email us. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to working with you on your next webinar or meeting or virtual conference.